The ballroom was a galaxy of cruelty, and Augusta Bell was its dimmest, most distant star. She was present, not as a guest, but as an obligation, a piece of furniture. Her wealthy cousin, Mrs. Albright, had been forced to bring along. Augusta's dress, a dove-gray silk that had been her best 2 seasons ago, was a whisper in a room of declarative shouts. She stood near a pillar where the shadows were kindest and watched the glittering tide of society ebb and flow. Her purpose here was simple: to be invisible, to require nothing, and to be ready to fetch a wrap or a glass of cooled lemonade the moment it was required. She had been a governess until a month ago, and the habit of quiet observation was a second skin. A poor gentlewoman with opinions is a luxury no household can afford. Her father had said that not with kindness, but with the weary sigh of a man burdened by a daughter who possessed both. So she had learned to swallow her opinions and cultivate a placid, uninteresting exterior. It was a form of armor. She saw him across the room. Of course, everyone saw the Duke of Alstone. He was not a man who commanded attention through noise or gesture, but through a stillness that seemed to draw the light and sound of the room towards him and absorb it. He stood, talking to a clutch of older men, his posture one of bored duty. Dark hair, a face that looked as if it had been carved from some stern, unyielding stone, and eyes that missed nothing. He had been an orphan, young, they said, inheriting a title and 2 younger siblings before he had fully inherited his own majority. Grief had frozen him, and the dukedom had sealed him in ice. Augusta's cousin fluttered by, her fan working like a frantic wing. For heaven's sake, Augusta, do try to look less like a paid mourner. You are frightening the eligible men. Augusta offered a small, meaningless smile. The eligible men were in no danger from her. They looked through her as if she were made of glass. And that was fine. That was safe. Her family's ruin was a fresh, raw wound. Her father's latest disastrous investment had consumed the last of their funds, leaving them with nothing but a name and a collection of rapidly accruing debts. Her position as a governess had been their only lifeline, and the paltry wage she sent home was the only thing keeping the bailiffs from the door. But then her young charge had contracted a fever, and in her grief, the mother had needed someone to blame. The governess was always the easiest target. Dismissed without a reference, Augusta had been cast adrift, landing here, in her cousin's house, on the bitter shores of charity. She needed to find a new position. She needed to save them. This glittering party was not an opportunity. It was a torture, a reminder of everything she was not. A ripple of interest passed through the crowd. The Duke was moving. He extricated himself from the politicians with a curt nod and began a slow, deliberate circuit of the room. Mothers subtly pushed their daughters forward. Fans beat a little faster. Laughter became a shade more musical. He noticed it all. Augusta was sure of it. He noticed the servante's tired hands as he took a glass of champagne. He noticed the laughter, pitched a shade too loud. He noticed her. His eyes met hers for no more than a second, a brief, assessing glance across the crowded floor. There was no warmth in it, only a cool, detached curiosity, as if he were cataloguing the room's fixtures. And then he moved on. Augusta felt a strange, unwelcome flush rise in her cheeks. To be seen, even for a moment, felt like a breach of her defenses. Later, as she was dutifully fetching a shawl for Mrs. Albright, she found her path blocked. Lady Somerset, a diamond, bright beauty with a notoriously sharp tongue, stood with her coterie of admirers. She had been making a great show of capturing the Duke's attention all evening, with little success. Well, look what we have here," Lady Somerset said, her voice carrying the little gray mouse, scurrying from her hole. Augusta inclined her head slightly. She tried to step around them. I saw the Duke looking at you." Lady Somerset purred her smile, all teeth. "Are you a new player on the field, a dark horse? Or just a new piece of hired help my cousin has acquired?" "I am Miss Bell," Augusta said, her voice low and even. Now, if you will excuse me." "Oh, I do not think I will. A Lady Somerset took a deliberate step back, jostling the arm of a young lord beside her, who was holding a glass of deep red claret. The glass tilted, and the wine arced through the air, a perfect, ruby stain that bloomed across the front of the Gusta's gray silk bodice. A collective gasp went through the small group. The wine was cold, a shocking splash against her skin, but the chill of the public humiliation was far colder. The stain was large, dark, and damning. It looked like blood. Oh my heavens! A Lady Somerset cried, her hand flying to her mouth in a perfect pantomime of distress. Ah, how clumsy of you, Miss Bell, to walk right into Lord Ashworth. You have quite ruined your dress. The lie was so bald, so blatant, that for a moment Augusta could not breathe. The surrounding faces, moments ago alight with dancing and champagne, were now a ring of curiosity and faint, pleasurable pity. She was the evening's entertainment. The crime was that she had been noticed. She stood frozen, the cold wine seeping through her chemise, the burning shame climbing her throat. Her cousin would be furious. A ruined dress was an expense she could not afford. The whispers started, little blades of sound. Ah, ah, governess, I heard. Ah, no family to speak of. Ah, trying to catch the Duca's eye, a bit above her station. She had two choices: to flee in tears, confirming their judgment of her as a hysterical, grasping nobody, or to stand her ground. She thought of her father's debts, her mother's anxious face, her sister's future. Fleeing was a luxury she did not have, so she lifted her chin. She looked directly at Lady Somerset, her gaze steady. It was an accident," she said, her voice a marvel of control. "A no harm done, a no harm." Lady Somerset's laugh was brittle. "Ah, my dear, you are ruined." The words hung in the air, a verdict delivered. And in that moment, as the circle of onlookers seemed to press in, a new silence fell, a different kind of silence. The crowd parted, and through it walked the Duke of Alstone. He stopped before the tableau of her humiliation. His gaze took in the scene, in an instant. The spilled wine, Lady Somerset's triumphant smirk, the ring of avid faces, and Augusta, standing alone in her stained gray dress, her back ramrod straight. He looked at her, and for the first time his expression was not detached. It was focused. He did not speak to Lady Somerset. He did not acknowledge the whispers. His attention was entirely on Augusta. Without a word, he shrugged out of his own formal evening coat, the dark, perfectly tailored wool, heavy and warm. He stepped forward and draped it over her shoulders. It was an act of impossible, shocking intimacy. The coat was huge on her, enveloping her from shoulders to knees. It smelled faintly of winter air, of starch, and of him. The lingering warmth of his body seeped through the silk of her ruined gown, a profound comfort against the spreading chill of the wine. The murmuring of the crowd died completely. There was only the sound of held breath. He looked at her, his dark eyes holding hers. "You seem to be cold, Miss Bell," he said, his voice a low rumble that cut through the silence. She could only stare at him. The heavy weight of his coat, a shield, a declaration. He had used her name. He had remembered it from that single fleeting glance. Then he offered her his arm. It was not a request. It was a command issued to her and to the entire room. "Allow me to escort you from this draft." The subtext was glacial. He was not rescuing a victim. He was aligning himself with her. He was choosing her side in front of everyone who mattered. Numbly, Augusta placed her hand on his arm. The fabric of his sleeve was crisp and fine beneath her trembling fingers. As he turned to lead her away, his gaze swept over Lady Somerset, a look of such profound Arctic dismissal that the woman visibly flinched, her triumphant smile faltering. He led her through the stunned assembly, the sea of glittering society, parting before them as if he were a ship of the line. The weight of his coat was the weight of his protection. The warmth was the warmth of his choice. He had not just saved her from a moment of shame. He had wrapped her in a scandal of his own making, and Augusta had no idea if she had been rescued or utterly, finally condemned. For a man like him to single out a woman like her was not a kindness, it was a brand. He did not stop until they were in the cool, quiet marble of the entrance hall, far from the prying eyes of the ballroom. The air here was blessedly cold on her hot cheeks. He released her arm and turned to face her, his expression unreadable in the dim light. My apologies, Miss Bella," he said, his tone formal clipped. That was an intolerable display. You have nothing to apologize for, Your Grace," she managed, her voice steadier than she felt. She clutched the lapels of his coat, a gesture of both gratitude and self-preservation. You were very kind." "It was not kindness," he said flatly. It was a correction. Cruelty seems already abundant this evening. I see no reason to add mine. He paused, his gaze dropping to the dark stain on her dress, now mostly hidden by his coat. Your reputation, however, is now in a more precarious position than your gown. She knew he was right. The gossip would be merciless. A nobody governess, singled out by the most eligible and unapproachable duke in England. They would paint her as a scheming adventuress of the highest order. Her chances of ever securing a respectable position were now precisely zero. "I am aware," she said quietly. She met his gaze, refusing to look away, refusing to show the terror that was beginning to dawn in her heart. She had to give his coat back, walk out into the night, and face the ruin he had inadvertently completed. "I have a carriage waiting," he said, as if she had not spoken. "It will take you home. My cousina will find her own way," he finished, a note of finality in his voice. He clearly had no high opinion of Mrs. Albright. My man will see you to the door." He was dismissing her. Of course he was. He had done his gentlemanly duty, and now he was disposing of the problem. The brief, impossible warmth she had felt under his protection evaporated, leaving a familiar ache of disappointment. She started to shrug off the heavy coat. Keep it," he said, his voice sharp. She stilled. Your Grace, I cannot. You can, and you will. It is cold outside." He looked at her, and a flicker of something she could not name crossed his face. Impatience? Or something else? Find myself in need of a wife, Miss Bell. I have a deadline. The trustees of my estate meet at the end of the year. They require me to be settled respectably. Ada words were so blunt, so utterly devoid of sentiment, that Augusta felt as though the floor had dropped away. She stared at him, certain she had misheard. "What? I do not understand." It is a simple enough statement," he said, his tone clipped and devoid of any emotion. Require a wife. You, as of 10 minutes ago, require a husband. Or at least, the protection of one. Your reputation is in tatters. Your prospects, I would venture, are nil. It seems to me that our needs, while disparate in scale, are mutually compatible in their solution. This was not a proposal. It was a diagnosis, a transaction. He was offering her a ducal coronet as if it were a plaster for a wound. The sheer audacity of it, the cold calculated logic, was breathtaking. "You would marry me?" She whispered the words, feeling alien in her mouth. "A dismissed governess?" "A woman you met not half an hour ago." Been observing you for longer than that," he corrected her. "A statement of fact, not a compliment. You do not flatter. You do not simper. You stood your ground back there, when a lesser woman would have dissolved into hysterics. You possess a composure I find adequate. You will do. You will do." The words were like a slap. Not a bride, but a candidate who had passed a cursory inspection. A solution to his problem who happened to be standing in the right place at the right time. She should have been insulted. She should have thrown his coat back in his face and walked away with her dignity, even if it meant walking into utter destitution. But she thought of her family. She saw her mother's worn hands, her father's defeated eyes. She thought of the letters begging for just a little more, just until things turned around. This man, this cold, unfeeling duke, was offering her a lifeline so immense it was unimaginable. He was offering her the power to save them all. In exchange for what? Her life, herself. A why? She asked. The question small but fierce. You could have any woman in that ballroom. Women with titles, with fortunes, with beauty. Why me? Because they are not what I need, he said simply. I do not need a love match. I do not need more wealth. I need a duchess who will be attractable, uncomplicated. You have no powerful family to meddle in my affairs. You have practical experience in managing a household. I presume my house is in chaos. My siblings are difficult. I need a manager, Miss Bell, not a lover. I am offering you a position, with a title attached. You will want for nothing. Your family will be provided for. In return, you will be my wife in name, run my household, and present a respectable face to the world. That is the bargain. He laid it all out, a ledger of souls. Her family's salvation on one side, her complete subjugation on the other. And yet, something inside her, a stubborn spark of the girl who read books, her father disapproved of, refused to be cowed. If she was to be sold, she would at least have a say in the price. I have conditions, she said. The Duca's eyebrows rose, a fractional, almost imperceptible movement. It was the first sign of surprise he had shown all evening indeed. Yes, Augusta said, her voice gaining strength. She was still wearing his coat, still standing in the shadow of his rank, but for the first time she felt as if she were on equal footing. She was a party to a negotiation now, not a recipient of charity. Before I answer anything, you will tell me the truth, all of it. I do not bargain with half a story. He regarded her for a long moment, his dark eyes searching her face. She met his gaze without flinching. This was the test. If he dismissed her now, then she would have her answer, but he did not. He gave a short, sharp nod. Very well. What are your terms? First, she said, ticking the points off in her mind, as if she were outlining a lesson plan. Ami family, you said they would be provided for. I want their debts settled in full, and a modest but secure income settled upon my parents for the remainder of their lives, and a dowry for my sister. A proper 180. He listened, his expression unchanging. I done, he said, when she had finished. I what else? I your siblings, she continued, pressing on. You say they are difficult. I will not be a stranger to them, a duchess who presides over the dinner table, and nothing more. If I am to be the mistress of the house, that includes the nursery and the schoolroom. I will have full authority in all domestic matters, and that includes their welfare and education. They are not to be kept from me. This, she thought, would be the point of contention. But he only nodded again. That is the primary reason I am seeking a wife at all. They need a woman's influence. My aunt has been insistent on the point, and on her own suitability for the role. A flicker of something hard and unpleasant crossed his face. I would prefer another candidate. Next to the woman who came before me, Augusta said, her voice softening slightly. Your late wife. His face shuddered completely, the brief flicker of emotion gone, replaced by a mask of ice. I have never been married. The statement hung in the air between them. Then the truth of his situation, the one he had alluded to, slotted into place. Your parents, she breathed. The house is in mourning for them. They died 2 years ago, he said, his voice clipped and devoid of feeling. The house is not in mourning, Miss Bell. It is frozen. There is a difference. I expect a duchess to thaw it. I do not, however, expect her to erase what came before. Is that your condition? That my mother's memory be respected, yes, she said firmly. I will not enter your house as a replacement. I will not have portraits taken down or rooms remade to erase her. The children should be allowed to grieve, not forced to forget. I will be your duchess, but I will not try to be their mother. A no one can replace a mother who was loved. The thought was so clear, so true, that she nearly said it aloud. For the first time, the Duke looked at her with something that was not calculation, not assessment, but a genuine, startling curiosity. He seemed to be seeing her not as a solution, but as a person. A person with principles, with a mind of her own. That, he said, his voice quieter than before, is a more sensible condition than any I would have anticipated. He paused. Is that all? A no? She took a breath. This was the most important point of all. Affection. It will not be performed. I will be a partner in the running of your estate. I will be a guardian to your siblings. I will be your duchess in public. I will not, however, play the part of a loving wife in private when no love exists. I will not pretend for your benefit, or for anyone else's. The bargain is a bargain. It must be honest. She had expected him to be relieved. It was, after all, what he had offered, but instead, a strange tense silence stretched between them. He looked at her, and his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I see, he said, his voice flat. You wish for the marriage to remain a transaction. Nothing more. It is what you offered. Your Grace, she reminded him gently. Indeed, he said. It is what I thought I asked. He seemed to be speaking more to himself than to her. He looked away for a moment, towards the distant sound of music from the ballroom. Very well, Miss Bell. Your conditions are accepted. He turned back to her. Do we have an agreement? She looked at this cold, formidable man, this duke who was offering her a kingdom, in exchange for her freedom. She thought of her family, of the shame of her dismissal, of the public humiliation she had just endured. This was not a fairy tale. There was no love, no illusion. It was a contract, signed in the shadow of ruin and scandal. But it was a rescue, for her family if not for herself. We have an agreement, Your Grace, she said, her voice clear and steady. A closed carriage took her not to her cousin's stifling townhouse, but to a solicitor's office, dark and quiet in the late hours. Papers were drawn up with breathtaking speed. Augusta signed her name, her hand not shaking, and watched as her life was bartered away in black ink. The settlement for her family was more generous than she had dared to hope. The weight of their survival lifted from her shoulders, only to be replaced by the heavier, colder weight of a ducal ring. The journey to Elston began the next morning. It was a long, silent drive, north, in the Duca's perfectly sprung coach. He sat opposite her, encased in his own private winter, reading a book of estate accounts. He did not speak, and she did not try to force conversation. The terms had been set. Outside, the autumn world was a riot of gold and red, but inside the carriage, the air was cool and still. Condensation misted the glass. With a gloved finger, Augusta traced her name on the pane. It looked fragile, impermanent, a breath of warm air, a wipe of a sleeve, and it would be gone. She was the Duchess of Alstone now, but it felt like a costume, a role she was playing. Her real name, the name of the woman who had been a governess, who had been dismissed and shamed, was just a ghost on a cold window, waiting to be erased. She watched the letters begin to fade, and a profound, aching loneliness settled over her. She had saved her family, but she had lost herself. Alstone Park was not a house, it was a monument. A vast, gray stone edifice that seemed to rise from the rolling northern hills, like a natural feature of the landscape. It was magnificent, imposing, and as cold as the Duke who owned it. As the carriage crunched to a halt on the gravel drive, Augusta felt her carefully constructed composure begin to crack. The house did not look frozen in grief. It looked as if it had never known warmth at all. The staff were lined up in the great hall, a somber receiving line of black and gray. The housekeeper, a Mrs. Croft with a face like a clenched fist, looked Augusta up and down with an expression that fell somewhere between suspicion and outright dislike. Your Grace, she said, her curtsy as stiff as her spine. It was clear they had all heard about the scandalous, hasty marriage. They were expecting an adventuress, a flighty girl who would be gone by spring. "Crofta," she said, her voice calm, "I look forward to working with you to restore order to this house." It was a statement of intent, not a request for friendship. A flicker of surprise crossed the older woman's face. But the staff were the least of her worries. The true challenge stood at the top of the grand staircase. A boy of about 16, tall and thin, with his brother's dark hair and a scornful expression, leaned against the balustrade. Beside him, a small, pale girl of perhaps 12 clutched a leather-bound sketchbook to her chest, as if it were a shield. They were Crispin's siblings, Julian and Eleanor. This is she," a Julian said, his voice dripping with aristocratic disdain. The new Duchess." "My brother's latest acquisition, a Juliana Crispinus," voice was sharp. A warning. The boy ignored him, his eyes fixed on Augusta. Tell me, your grace, what was your price? Or, should I not ask a lady about her business transactions?" The cruelty of it was a physical blow. Augusta felt the blood drain from her face. This was her new home. This was her new family. A hostile staff, a resentful boy, and a silent, frightened girl. She did not look to Crispin for help. This was her domain now. She had made that a condition. She looked directly up at the boy on the stairs. "Your brother and I have reached an agreement that is satisfactory to us both," she said, her voice even. "Thus, for my price. It was the security of my family. A price I was more than willing to pay. Is there anything else you wish to know?" Her directness seemed to startle him. He had expected her to be flustered, to appeal to his brother. Instead, she had answered him as an equal. He narrowed his eyes, searching for a weakness, but found none. He gave a curt, angry shrug and turned away. The little girl, Eleanor, had not moved. She simply watched Augusta with wide, unnervingly perceptive eyes before turning and vanishing down the corridor like a ghost. "I apologize for my brother," Crispin said, his voice low as he led Augusta towards the wing that would contain her chambers. He is a protective of our parents' memory. He is grieving." Augusta corrected him gently. Up, and angry. It is not the same thing." He stopped and looked at her. You are not what I expected," he said. It was not a compliment, merely an observation. People rarely are, your grace." She replied. Her rooms were vast, opulent, and utterly impersonal. A fire had been lit, but it did little to dispel the chill that seemed to seep from the stone walls. Left alone, Augusta walked to the window. It overlooked a formal garden that had been allowed to run wild, the rose bushes overgrown and choked with weeds, a perfect metaphor for the house itself. Beautiful, once loved, and now utterly neglected. The days that followed were a silent, lonely battle. Augusta did not try to win them over with charm or forced affection. She knew it would be seen as a lie. Instead, she relied on the one thing she truly possessed: competence. She won by staying, by being consistent where every governess and housekeeper before her had apparently fled. She began with the household accounts, which were in a state of catastrophic disarray. She spent 3 days in the estate office with ledgers and receipts, her fingers stained with ink, until she had untangled years of mismanagement and neglect. Mrs. Croft, the housekeeper, watched her with grudging respect. Augusta did not give orders. She asked questions. Why is the east wing kept closed? When was the last time the chimneys were swept? Why are we ordering flour from a merchant 50 miles away when there is a mill in our own village? It had been sealed on Crispin's orders 2 years ago. The household ran on a skeleton staff because he had dismissed half the servants, unable to bear their sympathetic glances. The house was literally and figuratively running on empty. She did not demand the east wing be opened. Instead, she began with small, quiet changes. She noticed that the curtains in the main library were always drawn, casting the room in a perpetual gloom. A footman told her the late Duchess had loved the morning sun in that room. The next day, Augusta opened them herself. When Crispin walked in and stopped blinking in the sudden flood of light, she simply said, "The room felt cold." He said nothing, but he did not order them closed again. Her approach with the children was the same: patient, quiet observation. Julian was a voracious reader, but he was bored. The library, for all its size, was full of dusty classics. Augusta, remembering her own intellectual curiosity at that age, wrote a letter to a bookseller in London, and, a week later, a crate arrived. It contained new scientific treatises, controversial political pamphlets, and the latest poetry from the continent. She did not give them to Julian. She simply left them on a table in the library. And, quote, she found him there that evening, utterly absorbed, the scornful mask forgotten. Eleanor was a harder puzzle. The girl rarely spoke, communicating mostly through her drawings. Augusta would find them left about the house as scraps of paper, with exquisitely detailed sketches of birds, leaves, and insects. She never drew people. One afternoon, Augusta saw her in the wild garden, trying to sketch a tiny wren that was flitting from branch to branch. The bird was too fast, and the garrulous frustration was palpable. That evening, Augusta went to the long-disused schoolroom. In a dusty cabinet, she found what she was looking for: a collection of ornithological books filled with hand-colored plates. She took the one on British garden birds and left it on a chair in the corner of the morning room, a place Eleanor often sat. She left it open to the page on wrens. For 2 days the book remained untouched. Augusta felt a pang of disappointment, believing she had misjudged. But on the third morning, she walked into the room to find Eleanor sitting on the floor, the heavy book open in her lap, her own sketchbook beside it. She was carefully, painstakingly copying the drawing of the wren. Her tongue stuck out in concentration. She looked up as Augusta entered, her eyes wide with alarm, as if caught doing something wrong. Augusta simply smiled. "He holds his tail at a very jaunter angle, does he not?" as she said quietly, and then she walked on, leaving the girl with her book. It was not a victory, but it was a beginning, a tiny crack in the ice. Crispin watched all of this from a distance. He had purchased a duchess, a solution to his problems. He had expected a decorative object, or at best, a competent manager. He had not expected this quiet, watchful woman who moved through his frozen house like a patient gardener tending to the neglected things, letting in the light. He found himself altering his daily routine, manufacturing reasons to be in the parts of the house she frequented. He would walk through the library when he knew she was there, or take his tea in the morning room. They rarely spoke of anything personal. They discussed estate matters, the village, Juliana's studies. But the silences between them began to change. They were no longer empty and cold, but filled with a strange, shared awareness. He would look up from his papers and find her watching him, her expression thoughtful, and she would look away, a faint flush on her cheeks. One evening, a fierce autumn gale swept down from the hills, rattling the window panes and howling in the chimneys. A branch crashed down in the drive, and the entire household was on edge. The lights flickered, and Eleanor, who was terrified of storms, let out a small cry. Augusta rose immediately. She did not go to the girl and offer empty platitudes. Instead, she began to speak to Mrs. Croft in a calm, low voice, organizing the distribution of candles, checking on the shutters, and ordering hot chocolate to be brought to the library. Her quiet efficiency was a calming balm on the household's frayed nerves. She turned a crisis into a routine. Later, she found Eleanor huddled in a window seat, staring out at the thrashing trees. Augusta sat not beside her, but on a nearby chair. She did not speak for a long time. Then she began to hum, a quiet, simple tune. It was a hymn, one her own mother used to sing during storms. Eleanor turned from the window, her eyes fixed on Augusta. "My mother sang that," she whispered, her voice barely audible. It was the first full sentence Augusta had ever heard her speak. "Aida's a good song for a storm," Augusta said gently. "Aida's about finding light in the darkness." She continued to hum, and after a moment, a tiny, hesitant voice joined hers. Eleanor sang the melody, her voice thin and reedy but perfectly in tune. They sat there for nearly an hour, singing quiet hymns together as the storm raged outside, two lonely souls finding a fragile harmony in the dark. Crispin stood in the doorway, hidden by the shadows. He had come to check on them, but he stopped, unwilling to break the spell. He listened to his sister's voice, a voice he had not heard raised in song since before their parents' death, and he watched the woman who was his wife. She was not trying to replace his mother. She was helping his sister remember her. And in that moment, watching her, he felt a sharp, unfamiliar pang in his chest. It was not respect. It was not gratitude. It was a terrifying, unwelcome tenderness. He had made a bargain to secure his house. He had not expected this woman to begin to feel like its heart. He had not expected to want her to stay for reasons that had nothing to do with their contract. He had inherited more debts of feeling than of money, and had discharged both badly. Until now, the thaw was slow, almost imperceptible, like the first hint of spring after a long winter. It was not one grand moment, but a series of small, quiet surrenders. Julian started seeking Augusta out to debate points of philosophy, treating her not as a stepmother, but as a respected intellectual opponent. He would leave books for her with passages marked, and find them returned with her own annotations in the margins, sharp and insightful. It was a conversation held in ink. Eleanor began to leave her drawings for Augusta directly, not on chairs or tables, but on the desk in her morning room. They were no longer just birds and leaves. One day, there was a sketch of Hector, the old sleeping bloodhound who lay by the fire. Another day, a surprisingly accurate drawing of Mrs. Croft's hands, gnarled but capable, as she kneaded dough in the kitchens. Eleanor was starting to see the people around her again. One evening, as Augusta passed her in the hall, the girl reached out a small hand and shyly tucked it into hers. The touch was feather-light, but it landed on Augusta with the force of a thunderclap. She simply squeezed the small fingers and walked with her to the dining room. A silent, profound alliance forged between them. Crispin found that the vast cold spaces of Alstone were shrinking. His world, which had been the size of his duty, was now focused on the library where she read, the garden she was beginning to reclaim, the quiet rustle of her skirts in the corridor. He started coming home from his rides earlier, abandoning his solitary contemplation of the moors for the charged silence of a room she occupied. One night, he found her in the estate office long after the rest of the house was asleep. A single lamp cast a pool of golden light on her bent head as she pored over a ledger. There was a smudge of ink on her cheek. The accounts can wait until morning. Augusta, he said, his voice softer than he intended. He had begun to use her given name in private, and the sound of it on his tongue was still a novelty, a small, guarded intimacy. She looked up, startled. No. But I think I found something. Each she gestured to the book. There are discrepancies. Payments made to a creditor in London, a Mr. Sneath, for the past 2 years, large payments. But there is no corresponding record of a loan. The debt does not seem to exist. He came to stand behind her, leaning over her shoulder to look at the ledger. He was close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him, could smell that scent of cold air and clean linen. Her breath caught in her throat. My father was a meticulous record-keeper, Crispin murmured, his eyes scanning the page. If he took a loan, there would be a record. This is irregular. That is what I thought, she said. It is almost as if someone were inventing a debt to drain money from the estate. He straightened up, his expression grim. I will have my solicitor in London look into this, Mr. Sneath. He looked at her, at the ink smudge on her cheek, at the earnest concentration in her eyes. I hired a duchess, he said, a note of wonder in his voice. It seems I acquired a master accountant instead. A governess must be good with figures. Your Grace, she said, a small smile touching her lips. Allowances are a battlefield. A real smile that reached his eyes. I am beginning to understand that. He reached out, his gesture, hesitant, and gently wiped the ink smudge from her cheek with his thumb. His touch was brief, electric. Her skin tingled where he had touched her. The air in the small office was suddenly thick, charged with unspoken things. "A Crispin?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. He dropped his hand, as if burned, a muscle working in his jaw. The mask of the cold Duke slammed back into place. It is late," he said, his voice stiff. You should get some rest." He turned and left without another word, leaving her alone in the lamplight, her heart hammering against her ribs. But the fragile peace they were building was not destined to last. It was a house of cards, and the slightest tremor could bring it down. The tremor came in the form of a letter, delivered on a silver tray and bearing a London seal. It was addressed to Crispin. He read it in the library, his face growing harder and colder with every line, until he looked like the stone effigy of an ancient king. Without a word, he handed the letter to Augusta. It was from a firm of solicitors, formally notifying him that his aunt, Lady Beatrice Vane, had filed a petition with the Court of Chancery. She was seeking to have him removed as the legal guardian of his siblings, Julian and Eleanor. The petition claimed that he was an emotionally neglectful and unfit guardian, and that his recent, scandalous marriage to a woman of no fortune or standing, a dismissed governessa, was proof of his recklessness and instability. It requested that guardianship and control of the children's considerable fortunes be transferred to her. A hearing was set for 1 month's time. The words blurred before Augusta's eyes. This was her fault. Her presence in this house, her name attached to his, was the weapon his aunt was using to tear his family apart. The scandal he had sought to contain by marrying her had instead metastasized into this new, far more dangerous threat. She was here just last week," Augusta said, her voice hollow. She brought Eleanor a new doll. She told Julian she was proud of his scholarship. "And my aunt is a patient predator," Crispin said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. She has been waiting for me to make a mistake. She believes she has found it in UI." The news swept through the house like a poison. Mrs. Croft and the staff looked at Augusta with a mixture of pity and accusation. Julian reacted with fury, slamming doors and declaring his aunt a vulture. But Eleanor's reaction was the most devastating. She retreated completely, the small, hesitant sparks of connection extinguished. She would not speak. She would not leave her room. Her sketchbook lay abandoned, and when Augusta tried to approach her, the girl flinched away as if from a blow. Augusta felt a cold dread settle in her soul. She had come to this house as part of a bargain, a means to an end, but somewhere along the way, the cold calculus had dissolved. She had come to care for this broken family, for the angry, intelligent boy and the silent, artistic girl. She had begun to feel something for the cold Duke, who was not cold at all, but a man encased in layers of grief and duty. And now, her very presence was threatening to destroy them. One evening, she found Crispin standing in the darkened gallery, staring up at the portrait of his parents. They were a handsome couple, his father stern and proud, his mother with a kind, gentle smile. Perhaps she is right," he said, not turning. Perhaps I am unfit. I gave them a house, but not a home. I have been more of a jailer than a brother." That is not true," Augusta said fiercely, coming to stand beside him. "You have been drowning under the weight of a responsibility you were never meant to carry alone. You have done your best, and my best has led to this," he said, his voice bitter. "A court battle that will put my siblings on display like chattel, and you at the center of a scandal that will ruin you permanently. Ada." He finally turned to face her, his eyes full of a bleak, raw pain that made her ache for him. This was not part of our bargain. Augusta, I brought you here to protect you from one scandal, not to plunge you into a worse one. I can release you from our contract. I can give you an annulment, a generous settlement. You can disappear, live a quiet life somewhere. No one would blame you. Adi offer was a lifeline. It was freedom. It was everything she should have wanted. A month ago, she would have taken it without a second thought. But looking at him now, at the despair in his eyes at the thought of leaving Julian and Eleanor to the mercies of their grasping aunt, she felt an iron resolve settle in her heart. She had made a promise to be the mistress of this house, to care for his siblings. She would not run now. And what of you? She asked. What of the children? Do you think your aunt will be a better guardian for them than you have been? No, he admitted, his voice rough. She cares for their fortunes, not for them. She will separate them, send Julian off to some dreary tutor and Eleanor to a finishing school that will crush what little spirit she has left. And then I am not leaving, Augusta said, her voice ringing with a conviction that surprised them both. I made a bargain, Your Grace. I will see it through. Your aunt thinks I am your weakness. We will prove to her that I am your strength. He stared at her, his face a mask of disbelief, and something else, something she dared not name. It looked almost like hope you would stay, he asked, his voice thick with emotion. And fight this. For them. For a family that is not yours. I signed a contract that made them my family, she said simply. I keep my promises. He took a step closer, his hands coming up to cup her face, his thumbs tracing the line of her jaw. His touch was no longer hesitant, but firm, possessive. Augusta, he breathed, his forehead resting against hers. You are a constant surprise. She closed her eyes, leaning into his touch, drawing strength from his closeness. We will not lose them. Crispon, she whispered. He said, his voice a raw vow. A we will not of the battle had been joined. It would not be fought with swords, but with whispers, with evidence and with the testimony of a broken family. And Augusta, the dismissed governess, the bargain duchess, stood at the heart of it all, no longer a pawn, but a queen defending her board. The day of the hearing was gray and cold, the sky a lid of iron over Alston Park. It was not held in a public courtroom, but in the vast, intimidating library of a neutral party, the Earl of Westering, who was the head of the family trustees. The room was lined with thousands of silent, leather-bound witnesses, and the air was thick with the scent of old paper and beeswax. A long mahogany table dominated the space, with the three trustees sober, grim-faced men in their 60s. Seated at its head, Lady Beatrice Vane was already there, dressed in elegant, sober black, a picture of concerned gravity. She sat with her solicitor, her hands folded demurely in her lap. She gave Augusta and Crispin a look of profound, sorrowful pity as they entered, as if this were all a terrible tragedy of their own making. Crispin was a monolith of controlled fury, his face pale and set. Augusta walked beside him, her head held high, wearing a simple dark blue dress. She was not a peeress robed in power, but she would not present herself as a victim either. Julian and Eleanor followed them, the boyish shoulders rigid with anger, the girl a pale, silent shadow clutching Augusta's hand. The proceedings began. Lady Beatrice's solicitor was smooth and practiced, painting a devastating picture. He spoke of Duke Alston's well-known emotional distance, his reclusiveness since the death of his parents. He described the house as a mausoleum, the children as neglected prisoners of their brother's grief. Then he turned his attention to Augusta. And into this sad, stagnant household, he said, his voice dripping with false sympathy, comes this woman, a Miss Augusta Bell, a person of no background, no standing. A governess dismissed from her previous post under a cloud of suspicion. He let that hang in the air. She is seen in public, embroiled in a scandalous scene at a ball, and within 24 hours, the Duke, who has shown no interest in matrimony for years, has married her in a secret, hasty ceremony. What are we to conclude from this, my lords? But that this is a woman of breathtaking opportunism, who has taken advantage of a grieving and vulnerable man to secure a title and a fortune. He presented Augusta not as a person, but as a symptom of Crispina's instability. Every word was a carefully aimed dart, designed to wound and to discredit. Augusta sat perfectly still, her hands clasped in her lap, her expression serene. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her flinch. When it was Crispina's solicitora's turn, he did his best to rebut, speaking of the Duca's devotion to his duty, his responsible management of the estate. But it sounded dry and hollow against the lurid tale of scandal and manipulation. Finally, the head trustee, Lord Westering, turned his stern gaze on Augusta. Your Grace," he said, the title sounding like an accusation. Your aunt. By marriage claims you are an unsuitable influence on these children. What say you to that?" This was it. The moment she had been dreading. She rose slowly to her feet. The room was utterly silent. She did not look at the trustees, or at Lady Beatrice. She looked at Crispin, at Julian, at Eleanor. My lords," she began, her voice quiet but carrying in the stillness. Cannot speak to my own suitability. That is for others to judge. I can only tell you what I have observed in the months I have been at Alstone." She did not defend herself. She did not speak of the scandal, or of her own past. She spoke of the children. Found a young man, Julian, of formidable intelligence and deep loyalty, who masked his grief with anger because he believed it was his duty to be strong for his family. I found a young woman, Eleanor, of profound artistic talent and a gentle heart, who had gone silent because she did not believe anyone was left to listen. I did not find neglected children. I found children who were grieving deeply in a house that had forgotten how to speak of its sorrow. She paused, her gaze sweeping over the three stern faces. My only effort has been to listen, to give Julian books that would challenge his mind, and to give Eleanor the tools to express the beauty she sees in the world. I did not try to replace their mother. I have only tried to remind them that she would have been proud of the people they are becoming. Her words were simple, direct, and unadorned. They were the truth. Lady Beatrice's solicitor began to rise, to object, but Lord Westering waved him down, his eyes fixed on Augusta. "And what of the Duke?" he asked. Lady Beatrice paints him as a cold and distant guardian." Augusta turned her head to look at Crispin, a soft, genuine warmth in her eyes. The Duke has carried a burden that would have crushed a lesser man. He has held his family, his title, and his estate together through a grief that would have shattered him. He is not cold. He is the strongest man I have ever known. He simply needed help in letting the light back into his house." A murmur went through the room. Lady Beatrice's face had tightened, her pious mask slipping. These are pretty words, Your Grace," Lord Westering said, his tone still skeptical. But they are only words. We must consider the children's own welfare." "Julian," he said, turning to the boy. You are old enough to have a voice here. Tell us, are you unhappy in your brother's care? Do you wish for a change?" Julian stood up, his lanky frame trembling slightly, but his eyes were clear and fierce. He looked not at the trustees, but at his aunt. "Unhappy," he said, his voice ringing with scorn. My brother has given me everything, a home, an education, his protection. And you dare to call him unfit?" He turned his gaze to Augusta. "And her. You call her an opportunist. She is the only person who has treated me not as a grieving child or an heir, but as a person. She has challenged me. She has taught me. She has more integrity in her little finger than you have, in your entire person, Aunt Beatrice." Cata. The rebuke was so sharp, so utterly damning, that Lady Beatrice actually paled. Lord Westering, taken aback by the boyish vehemence, turned to the last silent witness. "Eleanor," he said, his voice softening, "a child. You need not be afraid. No one will be angry with you. Just tell us, Are you happy at Alstone? Is this Womana? Is the Duchess kind to you? All eyes turned to the small, pale girl. Eleanor shrank back in her chair, her eyes wide with panic. Augusta's heart clenched. It was too much to ask of her. She would not be able to speak. Eleanor looked at her brother, at Crispin, and then at Augusta. Her gaze lingered on Augusta's face, and in her eyes was a desperate pleading question. Augusta gave her the smallest, most encouraging of smiles. Slowly, Eleanor stood. She was still clutching her sketchbook. She did not speak. Instead, she walked on trembling legs to the great mahogany table. With infinite care, she opened her sketchbook and laid it before the three trustees. There was a moment of confused silence. Lord Westering leaned forward to look. The other two followed. On the page was a drawing. It was not a bird or a leaf. It was a portrait, rendered in exquisite, loving detail. It was a drawing of four people, standing together in the newly tended garden at Alstone. There was Crispin, tall and proud, but with the hint of a smile on his lips. There was Julian, looking not scornful, but thoughtful. There was Eleanor herself, holding a flower. And standing in the center of them, her hand resting on Eleanor's shoulder, was Augusta. It was not a portrait of a duchess and her wards. It was a family, whole and happy and lit by a gentle sun. It was a testimony more powerful than any words could ever be. A long, profound silence filled the room. Lord Westering stared at the drawing, his stern face softening. He looked up at Eleanor and then at Augusta. He cleared his throat. Crispin rose to his feet. His voice when he spoke was low and resonant, filled with an authority that commanded the absolute attention of the room. "Ah, my lords," he said. "Ah, you have heard the testimony of my siblings. Now you will hear mine. Perstan." He turned and looked directly at Augusta, and it felt as if they were the only two people in the universe. This woman, Augusta Bell, did not seek a title. She did not entrap me. I sought her out. I chose her. I chose her because I saw in her a strength and an integrity that my life and the lives of my family desperately needed. Lady Beatrice accuses her of being my greatest mistake. She is wrong, R.A. He paused, his gaze unwavering. Ah, she is the single wisest decision I have ever made. She did not marry me to become a duchess. She married me to save her family. What I had not expected, he said, his voice dropping to an intimate, carrying whisper, was that in doing so, she would save mine. She is the Duchess of Alstone. She is my wife, and she is the heart of my house. Any attempt to remove her, or my siblings, from my care, will be met with the full and unyielding force of my name and my fortune. Is that understood? The declaration of belonging was absolute. It was a shield, a sword, a promise. It was everything. Lord Westering looked from Crispina's resolute face to the simple, eloquent drawing in the sketchbook, and then to the furious, thwarted expression on Lady Beatrice's face. "I believe it is, Your Grace," he said quietly. Perfectly." He gathered his papers. This petition is dismissed." Lady Beatrice Vane did not leave in a storm of fury. She simply shrank, becoming irrelevant. The silence of a room that no longer believes you is a far more devastating punishment than any public rebuke. She gathered her things and swept out a ghost at her own feast. That night, the house was still. The air, which for weeks had been thick with tension and fear, was finally clear. Augusta stood in the library, staring out the tall window at a sky awash with stars. She had won. They had won. The children were safe. Her place here was secure. But it was a place won by contract and by battle, not by affection. The bargain held. She heard him enter the room, his footsteps soft on the old rug. He came to stand beside her at the window. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The solicitor in London has concluded his inquiries into Mr. Sneath, he said at last, his voice low. Augusta turned from the window. He does not exist," Crispin said. "The address is a false one. The payments from the estate were being redirected into an account held by a third party, He paused, An account belonging to Lady Beatrice Vane. The final piece of the puzzle slotted into place. As she was stealing from you, Augusta breathed. All this time, for 2 years, he confirmed. His voice flat. She was manufacturing a debt to drain the estate, likely to weaken my position and make her own claim for guardianship seem more financially sensible. Your discovery of it, had it come to light, would have ruined her. The custody petition was a desperate, preemptive strike at. It was a cold, calculated cruelty that was almost beyond comprehension. Augusta felt a chill run down her spine. She would have destroyed her own family for money. She very nearly did, he said. He took a step closer. The starlight from the window silvered the side of his face, leaving the rest in shadow. Augusta, what I said today in the library. You said what was necessary to win, she finished for him, her voice quiet. She could not bear to hear him admit it was all a performance. Oh, we're magnificent. Ah, no, he said, his voice raw. Ah, was honest. For the first time in a very long time. He reached for her, his hands finding hers, his fingers lacing through hers. His skin was warm and strong. I made you a bargain. I offered you a position. A cold, empty contract, because I was a cold, empty man. I was a coward, hiding behind my grief and my duty, because it was easier than feeling anything. He lifted her hand and pressed his lips to her knuckles, a gesture of such aching tenderness that it made her heart stop. I offered you a contract to save your family, he repeated, his voice thick with an emotion he no longer tried to hide. I did not know I was asking you to save mine, and to save me from myself. You walked into my frozen house, and you did not try to light a fire. You simply opened the curtains and let the sun in. You thought us, Augusta, all of us. Tears pricked at the back of her eyes. She had held them back, through shame, through fear, through battle. But she could not hold them back against this simple, devastating kindness. Crispina, she whispered. I have not been honest with you, he said. Our bargaina, I have wanted to break it from the moment you agreed to it. From the moment you stood in that hall and set your conditions. And I realized I had found not a duchess, but a woman of steel and fire. She looked up at him, at his beautiful stern face, now vulnerable and open in the starlight. Do not say it if it is only gratitude, she whispered the words a plea. Her heart could not bear the weight of a love born only of obligation. A gratitude, he gave a short, rough laugh. I am grateful to you, Augusta, but what I feel for you, it is not gratitude. It is awe. It is a desperate, terrifying need to keep you here, to make you happy, to be a man worthy of the woman I was somehow lucky enough to find. He cupped her face in his hands, his dark eyes searching hers. I love you. Not as part of a bargain, not as my duchess, but as Augusta, the woman who taught my sister to sing again, the woman who reads Tacitus, the woman who saw a man drowning and did not walk away. The tears finally fell, tracking silently down her cheeks. He wiped them away with his thumbs, his touch infinitely gentle. I stayed because I had no choice, she confessed, her voice choked. But then, I stayed because I wanted to. Because of Julian and Eleanor, and because of you. I saw a man who was carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders, and I wanted to help him bear it. He lowered his head and kissed her. It was not a kiss of passion, not yet. It was a kiss of profound, shattering relief. It was a promise. It was the sealing of a new bargain, one written not in ink, but in the quiet, unshakable language of the heart. When he finally drew back, he rested his forehead against hers. My name is not written in frost anymore, she whispered, a thought surfacing from that first, lonely day. He looked at her, confused. What? It is nothing, she said, smiling through her tears. Silly thought, I had a long time ago. He did not press her. He simply held her there in the quiet library, as the house slept peacefully around them for the first time in years. 6 months later, spring came to Alstone Park. It came not just to the gardens, where Augusta's patient work had resulted in a riot of daffodils and narcissus. But to the house itself, the east wing was open, its rooms filled with sunlight. The sound of Eleanor's laughter could often be heard from the schoolroom, where she was now taking lessons in watercolor from a master Augusta had found for her. Julian was preparing for Oxford, his debates with Augusta and Crispin over the dinner table a nightly ritual of fierce, affectionate, intellectual combat. The estate, under Augusta and Crispin's joint management, was thriving. The struggling village at its border had a new mill, funded by the recovery of the money Lady Beatrice had stolen. Augusta had become not just the Duchess, but a beloved, respected figure in her own right, known for her practicality and her quiet kindness. One cool evening, she stood at the window of their bedroom, the one that had once been so cold and impersonal. Crispin came up behind her, sliding his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the last of the evening light fade from the sky. The glass was cool against her fingers. Idly, she traced a letter on the pane. An A. A what are you thinking about? He murmured into her hair. She smiled, leaning back against the solid warmth of his chest. A was thinking about our bargain. A? Ah, yes, he said, his voice laced with humor. The one where I acquired a duchess and ended up with a partner, a strategist, a friend. I fear you got the worst end of that deal. I think, she said, turning in his arms to face him. That I got exactly what I needed. He smiled, a slow, warm smile that still had the power to make her heart ache. He looked at the letter she had traced on the glass. Augusta, he said, his hand covering hers, his voice soft but sure. Ah, that name is not written in frost anymore. He leaned in and kissed her, a deep, familiar kiss of a man who was home. It is carved in the stone of this house. And she knew it was true. She had come to Alstone as a solution, a bargain, a name on a contract. She had been the woman who was needed, but through patience and courage, and a love she had never expected to find, she had become something more. She had become the woman who stayed. Was it her strength or her kindness that truly won the Duque's heart? I wonder what you think was the precise moment the bargain turned to love. Thank you for joining me for this story. If you enjoyed our journey to Alstone Park, please show your appreciation by clicking the like button and subscribe to our channel for more tales of love against the odds. We love hearing from you, so please leave a comment below and let us know where in the world you are listening from and what your favorite part of the story was. We look forward to sharing another story with you very soon.